It's my privilege to introduce our guests today, Bridget Bryson and Angelique Nasah of Anthem Incorporated. I've known Bridget since we were both graduate students at the University of Northern Colorado. I ran into Bridget again and met Angelique when I attended their excellent session at ISPI last year. We know that task analysis is important. We also know that conducting task analysis as part of a virtual team can be hard. In their work at Anthem, Bridget and Angelique work with their geographically distributed teams to conduct all of their task analyses virtually. During their time with us, Bridget and Angelique will describe how they got into the performance improvement business, share how they conduct virtual task analysis in their work with Anthem. Anthem is an independent licensee of Blue Cross Blue Shield health insurance plans. They'll also share their tips about how to work with SMEs in a virtual environment, and they'll answer your questions. Bridget and Angelique, we're delighted to have you with us today.
Well, thank you for having us. We're really excited to be here talking shop with you all. Well, once our presentation is loaded here, we'll just go ahead and get started. If we go to the next slide, maybe Angelique, you can. Oh, there we go. Look at that. While you're looking at this, Kilimanjaro spices and such, well, what does that have to do with performance improvement and what we're here to talk to you about in terms of virtual teams and conducting virtual analysis? Well, it's all about Angelique and I with what we're really passionate about. We're very passionate about performance improvement. We wouldn't be where we are if we weren't, and obviously we wouldn't be sharing with you some of our best practices if we didn't have passion. But, our passion extends beyond just performance improvement. I have a passion for mountains, and recently completed hiking all of the Colorado 14,000-foot mountains, but also got to the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro in September. So that is just one passion that outside of performance improvement that I wanted to share with you all today. And I will let Angelique talk a little bit about spices. But before then, why I chose performance improvement as a career. And it's kind of interesting the way that we all lead to our careers. There are defining moments, specific decisions on whether we choose A or B. I kind of got into performance improvement by way of college radio. I was a college DJ. Then I had my own music video show that was broadcast to cable access. And then from there I learned all of the equipment. I started, in the TV studio. And then when I graduated undergrad, they said to me, hey, this equipment, some folks are leaving. We're moving to another building. And basically weaseled my way into a job right after college. And I worked with professors to put courseware online, to create instructional videos that were put into computer-based training. And then I started thinking, why do I feel that this should be in a different place, or why do I think content should be sequenced in a way? And then it was just introduced to me that this was a whole field, and somebody suggested that I check out University of Northern Colorado on a ski trip, and I sat down with one of the professors there who we just had a really candid conversation about what I was doing, where I thought I might go, and they saw that and said, this is where you're going to be, and you're going to get into performance improvement as a career. And I said, I'm all for it. So that's how I got into it. I've been in this industry for quite a long time. Video also enabled me the opportunity to be an intern at a telecom company, where I developed training courses for virtual teaming, how to be an effective virtual team member, how to manage a virtual team, and then learned all of the tools there, and ended up here at Anthem, where most of our work is done virtually. So I will go ahead and stop there, and I'll hand it over to Angelique to introduce herself and her passion and why she chose performance improvement as a career.
Thank you very, very much, Bridget. And it is my pleasure to greet everyone this afternoon. I'm really happy to be here and to have this opportunity to talk with you today about virtual teams, virtual task analysis, and how we do what we do at Anthem. But as Bridget mentioned, we thought it would be interesting for you to know a little something about us on a personal side before we begin talking to you about our professional lives and how we implement what we do at Anthem. And so as Bridget has this incredible passion for outdoors and nature and mountain climbing, and other kinds of things as well, I have a tremendous passion for family and food. And so I put on this slide for you some of my favorite spices to make a curry, and I'm going to give you a very quick recipe. You can put together some red chilies, as hot or as mild as you like. If you like a little heat, that's great. I do. We love it. But, some people want something a little milder, along with some coriander seeds, bay leaves, cloves. We've got a little smoked pimento and little ground up red spices together, along with some black peppercorns and turmeric is in the one in the center. A lot of people think that it's actually curry powder, but if you're making a curry from scratch, you don't necessarily need to bring in the curry powder, but the turmeric for color, and it's also a great spice for a lot of other things as well. So you wrap that all in a wonderful little cheesecloth, and you put that in a pot with a can of coconut milk, and you let that stew for a while. If you sauteed some onions in a little olive oil or a Mediterranean blend before you started stewing it, that would be awesome. And then you can add to that any type of sauteed meat that you would like or not, and serve it over rice, and you've got a delicious curry. And my contact information, along with Bridget's, is at the end of the slide deck if you want another go or another pass at that recipe. So that's part of what makes me who I am. But the other part of what makes me who I am is my professional life. And I think that question about why you choose performance improvement as a career is very interesting. And like Bridget, I came into this career from a different door. It was not a direct path for me. I began my career as a high school English teacher, and I loved doing it. I taught in public schools for 7 years and enjoyed every moment of it. And in about that seventh year, I decided to go back to graduate school, and it was in graduate school that I discovered the field of performance improvement when I had to do a cognitive, 3 classes in something other than English education, which is what I was majoring in. I discovered this field of andragogy, adult learning, and working with organizations that are trying to move people in a particular direction and impact change, impact bottom lines, and so on and so forth. And I became very fascinated with it. And so I pursued it and ended up getting an advanced degree so that I could actually really learn how to do the work before I pursued the career, but ended up getting some very interesting opportunities along the way. I've worked at a university. I've also worked as a consultant with a variety of corporate entities, and I've also worked for L3 Communications, which is a very large government contractor, and I was contracted out to the Marine Corps Training Systems Command doing virtual training systems evaluation of effectiveness. So it's been a very interesting, very wonderful career choice, and I applaud you for getting into it at the point at which you are in your careers. And with that said, let me just take a minute to talk about what we're going to do in the remaining moments that we have for this webinar. We are going to talk about working in virtual teams and conducting virtual task analysis. We think you're very interested in that, of course, because that is the topic of the discussion for today. We're also going to give you some information about how we figured out what works for Anthem based on our corporate culture and our enterprise tool set and some of the other things that we have available to us. And also some of the constraints that require us to make some very interesting choices in our virtual workspace. And then, of course, we're going to leave a large part of the presentation open for questions and discussion. And with that said, let me move on to the next slide and let Bridget tell you a little bit about Anthem.
Yeah, we won't say a whole lot about Anthem. It's the presentation is more about you and virtual analysis and virtual teaming. Steve did a great introduction with Anthem Inc. 1 in 9 Americans are covered by one of our health plans. We have 33 million medical members, and as you see in this picture of the U.S., we have 14 blue states. So we are a Blue Cross Blue Shield subsidiary for these 14 states. But we also have Medicaid business in other states, and our national accounts can have members in every single state. So when we talk about virtual teaming and virtual analysis, we are using it every day. And we have 44,000 people at Anthem that are employed by Anthem that we work with. Just a content development team alone is 97 people. We also have about 40 contractors as well. So when you think about what Anthem does and what we do internally to support our members, to support our associates, we're doing it across boundaries. And so it's our normal, just like you are learning how to learn virtually, to be a part of a program that you're attending, these talking shop courses, discussion boards, etc. We are heavily reliant on the technology that we can use with not just meeting, but also interacting from day to day, minute to minute. So when we think about virtual teaming, it's not easy. It's not without challenges, and the stakes are really high. There's plenty of places to find out about virtual teams. There's some really great books. One of my favorites is Mastering Virtual Teams by Deborah Duarte. They're in their 3rd edition of that book. So there's a lot of places to go to get more information and to research on your own. But we want to just kind of share what we've learned, and we use industry tools to get our work done. We use virtual meeting software similar to Fuse. We actually use Adobe Connect, so that's a great virtual classroom tool that we have embraced, not just to deliver training, but also to do our virtual analysis and also run our team meetings with subject matter experts, meeting with business partners. We can, record it, make sure that we can go back to those recordings and really pay more attention to what they're saying and what it means to us versus, the word to word where we have a record of it that we can always access later. So we use virtual meeting software. We have enterprise instant messaging. I know that I personally would not be able to connect with people as much as I do without that instant messaging. We have phone conferencing. We have a social site where we post articles, we post new processes, new tools. We have, SharePoint lists of all of the work that we do, who's doing it, what is the work, and who is the work for. We always have to kind of keep in mind, how are we connecting? How are we making it real for each other and for our business partners? So we have a lot of opportunities for engagement outside of just the work itself. We have to make sure that we're connecting, but we're also leveraging the knowledge that is across the states as well. We have community of practices, we have virtual development opportunities. We're always looking at ways to be better as well. So, and then that's outside of any sort of team meeting. So how does this work, with our clients, right? Our business partners, and it's challenging. It requires focus, and it also requires a lot of diligence and self-monitoring as well. I mentioned that the stakes are high. It's easy to erode trust very quickly in a virtual environment. You have to be very careful with your communications. You have to be very clear with roles and responsibilities. Decision-making using our RACI matrices. We have to have a very clear process and make sure that everyone knows where people fit in that process. And then I think the most important thing is actually relationship building. Being able to build relationships virtually is absolutely critical in an internal type environment. I did look at and watch Judy Hale's presentation, and she talked to you all about coming in as an external consultant and what you bring to the table, your expertise and experience. You can, push those folks that you're working with as a consultant a little bit more than you could internally. But if you don't have a relationship and you don't build trust, then you absolutely have no ground to share your experience and your expertise and to make really tough decisions or have tough conversations with your business partners. So internally, it is absolutely critical for you to know when to be proactive, when to be reactive, how reactive, when to push, when to pull, when is too much and when is too little. And are you truly trustworthy and reliable? So you've got to follow through. You can't let trust erode. And if you feel like trust is eroding, then absolutely get on the phone, make the connection, talk through it, be candid and compassionate. And I think people, when they know you really care about the ultimate solution, those conversations can become easier. And when you have trust, you can really find ways to push back. If you try to push your agenda forward or push a solution without having that, without having the discovery, without talking about it, with kind of trying to present a solution before you have the details, then they will dismiss you. They will dismiss your experience and your expertise, and it doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. They will not get on board. So one of the quotes that I really that resonates with me when you think about just relationships in general, but also in the virtual environment, is Maya Angelou's quote. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And this is even more critical in a virtual environment. If they know you care, if you're compassionate, if you have their interest in mind, and you put your expertise and experience behind it, then you will get to where you need to be, and you can implement the type of performance improvement solutions for the business that truly make a difference. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Angelique to talk a little bit more about virtual analysis and some of the people and the data and the tools and techniques that we use. Angelique, are you there?
I am there, and I'm just talking away on mute. You know, one of those challenges with the virtual space, you know, trying not to interrupt by going on mute, and then you need to come back off of mute when you need to talk. Sorry about that. I wanted to remind everyone who's participating today that if you have questions as we're going through some of these early slides, please feel free to drop them in the chat group chat pod. And also, I entered in some information there about where you can find some of the information on virtual teams and virtual team work that Bridget discussed earlier. So, you know, as Bridget mentioned, and it was important for you to understand the context within which we work at Anthem. As she mentioned, Anthem is a very large enterprise, and we're nationwide, and we have people in every single state doing work on behalf of 33 million people in the country. And so in order to do the work that we must accomplish, we had to figure out a way to get at the information we needed to get at in an effective manner with the varieties of people at different levels of the organization in order to get to that, you know, successful outcome with solutions that work for folks. What you're looking at is a chart that sort of simplifies our thought process. And it's important for you to understand that, you know, when I'm doing my work as a lead ID and I get a request for service and we're trying to come up with the best solution and do some performance consulting with our business partners who've made those requests, I'm not looking at this chart when I'm looking at the work request and trying to see where the request fits. I think at this point in our work, a lot of that is very intuitive, and the conversations become easier over time. It goes to that trustworthy and reliable piece that that Bridget talked about. But it is important, though, I think, at the beginning, when you're beginning this kind of work, to really compartmentalize these ideas. Which type of folks are you dealing with in that first column? Who are the people? Who are the players? And what is their modus operandi? You know, how does an executive leader operate? How does an individual contributor operate? What is a business analyst mission? You know, once you kind of get a sense of how people operate, then we kind of understand in that second column the kind of information we can mine from that person. You know, we can't sort of go to the executive leader and say, what part of the system is being updated for the upcoming ICD-10 implementation? The executive leader is not going to know that, right? It seems a little bit nonsensical to try to ask that question. But we can say to the executive leader, when is it that we need to have ICD-10 implemented for the entire enterprise so that we can get that information so that we can build our project plan from that date. That's our target. Then, of course, once we know who we're talking to, what kind of information we're going to try to mine from that person, then we get into the tools and techniques of virtual work. If we're trying to figure out what the need is, it's going to be very much easier for us to work with executive leaders and department directors via phone and screen share within a tool like Adobe Connect, or within Microsoft Link, which also has that option for sharing information across the ether. If we're working with people who are a little bit closer to the work, managers, business analysts, folks who are impacting organizations at that level of bringing the change to the frontline staff, then we're able to get from them the kind of frameworks and procedures at a high level, things that they want folks to be able to do in order to impact that change. We try a think aloud, traditional think aloud protocol that Regula talks about, right? But we have to do that in the virtual space. Again, phone conferencing, screen sharing, screen capture sessions where we are having folks sort of step through high-level procedures and processes so that we can actually see that work being done. And then, of course, with our individual contributors, the folks who actually do the work on the front line, we're actually refining those processes and procedures and getting very real with it, right? I talk about going on the Oprah couch at this level and saying, okay, what is the real deal with this process that the pie in the sky manager has said they want? How are you going to actually get it done? And we do a lot of recorded observations so that we can go back and really capture those steps and get them into the documentation that eventually has to be published, or whatever the solution is going to be. I see some questions in the chat. What strategies does your team use to build relationships and trust? Wow. Our team uses virtual pizza parties and wine tasting. That is very cool. Hard to do a wine tasting over the ether. But there are a lot of things that we do at the beginning of a project. One of the things that we do is to have a project kickoff. Once we have the mission, the goal, we have that refined, we have all of the players, the stakeholders, all of the subject matter experts, all of the people who have a stake in the success of the project and the solution. We bring everyone together and set expectations and do a lot of level setting at the beginning with a project kickoff. And what we learned over the many projects that we've worked with our business partners is that it's really important to have regular working sessions so that we're touching people constantly and having conversations versus sending email back and forth about processes and procedures. I'm looking at some of these questions. Are the folks all SMEs, novices, combinations? It's always a combination. We have some folks who are managers, some folks who are really close to the work, are subject matter experts, but they don't have as much time. We have some folks at the midpoint of that. They're called operational experts. They're not quite managers, but they're not on the front line. They're sort of looking at the procedures and refining them and helping us with that as well. And I like how Bridget has answered that question as well. So what works for Anthem is a combination of getting with folks in a virtual meeting space similar to this so that we can actually have a conversation, look at the procedures that have to be trained, and then also working with our own learning and development teams in the same type of virtual space to create the solution. We also have a very robust content review procedure that we're adopting within our learning and development group that takes advantage of some very high-level tools within SharePoint. It allows us to set automated tasks for review so that we're not having to spend a lot of time administering the review process, and we can spend a lot more time developing the relationships. Steve thinks that for every SME, there is an equal and opposite SME. Right. And so it's interesting that that question came up right at the point where I was talking about our Content Review Command Center. It's that automated process that I was talking about. So we tend to resolve SME disputes by allowing the SMEs to see what they are saying. And we also have those working sessions where if the electronic and virtual space cannot resolve it, if folks can't come to an agreement in that automated space on the Content Review Command Center, we are going to have that weekly or biweekly group team meeting where we're going to come together and say, okay, folks, we've got to come to a decision. What's it going to be? And that's really the only way to resolve it. Old-fashioned conversations in a newfangled virtual space, right? I'm going to advance to the next slide because we're over our 30-minute mark, and we've got a few more slides left before we can do the free-for-all Q&A. But I want Bridget to begin talking about how we know we have been successful in the virtual space by virtue of some of the data that we have available to us. Bridget?
Yeah, that's a great point. And well, why don't we see? Is there any specific questions on what Angelique just shared before we get into that? Maybe somebody has a live question or a comment.
There's a question in the chat pod, Bridget.
Yeah, how does Anthem test the technical accuracy, completeness? Yeah, Angelique, you wanna take that one?
Sure. So we get a procedure raw. We have a variety of ways to test it. Some of our instructional designers and documentation analysts actually have a lot of experience in some of the systems that we support and can test out some of these procedures and then send the procedures to be retested by our what we call process experts in certain departments that we support. And then those process experts will provide validation for us. And then again, in those working group sessions, we throw up a screen share and have the subject matter expert go through the process right in front of everybody in the working group so that we can validate and update, change, tweak the process as necessary. It's pretty efficient.
Did that answer the question?
I hope so. The other thing that's helpful also is working with our trainers as subject matter experts, because our trainers who use the content that we develop to train are also really serious experts on some of these systems that we support. And they are also able to provide us with a lot of feedback before, during, and after training has been implemented.
Yeah, that's a good point. One of the things that we've heard recently from the business is, we need to really get even closer to what they do, what those learners do. And so we have an effort underway, we're calling it our immersion project, where we're not going to become experts. We're never going to be the experts. But we are taking time out of our day to have to sit side by side with those learners. We also can access recorded calls from our call centers, and sometimes the calls have both the audio and the video, so we can actually validate and test, did we train them in the way that they're actually using the systems, and if it's different, is it common knowledge that they got it? Was there a mentor? Was there a lead that showed them something different? And so we can observe how they're actually applying, actually performing their job, which is pretty cool. So we can test it that way as well. And in just the 8 folks that went through immersion last fall, they each identified 3 opportunities where we could increase the effectiveness of our material, whether it be job aid, whether it be practice in the class, and all of their recommendations are being, considered and implemented in the next version of the course, which is pretty cool. And the fact that we got to sit, watch, look at them after we developed and say, well, how can we improve? How can we make this more relevant to their job? And so that's something that we're doing. So how do we know we've been successful? I've blurred out the names here, but we utilize Metrics That Matter. It's a tool from Knowledge Advisors that basically automates our post-class surveys. And you can see across the top what our key performance indicators are: courseware, instructor, learning effectiveness, job impact, alignment, business results, ROI, and support tools. Some of these KPIs are measured by predictive analysis or predictive questions that the learners will answer. But we measure all of our courses, and each year we are getting closer and closer to best in class of all of the data that Metrics That Matter actually has. So you can see here that I like to call it the forest, so everything's in green. You'll see like there's a little red bar down there, and I purposely left this on there. These were classes developed and delivered by subject matter experts. So we're in the green, and these among the best targets are actually among the best in all of the Knowledge Advisors data for all of the companies that use the Metrics That Matter evaluations. So this one shows you virtual classroom delivery, and then the next one shows you the instructor-led delivery method. We have to, the way that these reports are provided and set up is we have the data based on the modality, and the targets are a little bit different and based off of industry benchmarks. So Angelique is answering that question in the group chat. Any other questions on this?
Yeah, I would like to make a comment about what we're looking at. If you look at that courseware set of results, I think it's very telling of the fact that what we do in a virtual space is as good or even better than what might be produced in a sort of traditional instructional design shop. We're knocking it out of the park. Yeah, we want to get darker though. We want all of our green to be super dark.
Well, we were all dark a couple years ago, and then they bumped our goal up. So
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
wait a minute, still all green.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the instructional designers. Let's kind of talk a little bit about this, and so somebody has another question. The instructional designers will actually get monthly reports, and they know what courses they've developed, and then they can see month by month how that course is performing in the classroom. Which is something that we've been striving to do over the last couple of years, but now we've got it really connected. Yeah, that's a good question. If you want some more information about knowledge advisors had worked with Phillips on all of the post-course evaluations and predictive indicators. So what you're seeing here is really grounded in that Phillips methodology around ROI, in addition to some of these other key performance indicators. And one of the things that we've been doing is we actually recently had a conversation with Jack about how we're measuring even beyond what you're seeing here. We have been piloting a program called Return on Performance Expectations, and it's a highly intensive process that we work with the business, and we identify specific key performance indicators that they measure their effectiveness on. And then we get that data for the new hires. We connected up with these post-course results and also level 2 results to make the determination, are we providing the training and the performance solutions for those new hires in a way that they can perform on the job when they're complete? And are the assessments true indicators of performance on the job? So just thought I'd add that in. It's something that we are testing out with different areas right now, but we've recently had conversations with Jack on what we're doing, how we're doing it, and he was pretty impressed with our rope program.
Okay. I dropped a little article on that. It's from ATD. Real quick, it's maybe like a 20-minute read, so it'll give you a nice overview of rope and the difference between rope and ROI. We don't want to be tongue-in-cheek or coy. And Bridget mentioned this earlier, but in the interest of full disclosure, this work, the way that we work, it is impactful and it works for us. And we have the kind of infrastructure and enterprise environment that really allows and indeed promotes virtual teaming. But it's not without its challenges. Do our teams ever meet face-to-face? Yes. In fact, my team is meeting in Denver, where Bridget is located, next week. I was just with Bridget a week ago, I can't think. I think it was a week ago.
Yeah, it was last week.
It was last week. So yes, we meet face to face, but we do the core work is done virtually. Do we ever meet face to face with our business partners? Yes. Bridget talked about our immersion project, and when we go to have our team meetings For example, when I'm in Denver next week, I will spend a little time hopping around to different groups and doing some side-by-sides and sitting with people and making those connections and developing relationships. Are there times when communications and technology will fail us? Yes, but we always plan for a backup. You've got to always have another way to get the work done. With that said, though, if an organization really spends the time planning and there's leadership that supports this model, this way of working and doing performance improvement as a craft, it is extremely impactful. And I have to say that I tell people all the time, the level of detail is tremendous. So let me pause my comment. When is the task analysis done? It's done at the beginning of the project, throughout the work of a project, up until we're ready to get those materials published. We're always refining tasks because things in our enterprise change all the time. It changes even as we're working on getting training prepared to be implemented. So we're always doing it. And the level of detail is minute. It's very, very fine because it's extremely granular because the folks that we're training are working with, as Bridget mentioned, 33 million people across the country to answer questions about all kinds of things related to a tremendous variety of health plans. And so folks have to be able to get those answers, get them quickly, no matter what the question is. And in many cases, working with multiple systems at a time to answer those questions from our membership and providers who work with our members. And I like Bridget's comment in the chat. Systems can also change at the spur of the moment too. Like we'll start a project on a system, and they'll sort of add. We learn through task analysis that we've got to add a system or take something away in terms of how the process is best, most efficiently implemented. Other questions?
Yeah, Angelique, there was another one in there about the level of detail that a typical task analysis includes, and I don't think that's a really black or white type of a question. I think it really depends on what we're trying to achieve. Would you agree?
I would agree. I think for folks who are working in our call centers, we get to a very fine level of detail, and every step of a process, we try as much as we can to get those right at a very fine level. But you're right, Bridget. I think it does depend on the goal of the request that has come in. What is it that we're trying to do? When we think about introducing the new Anthem Care Management team that came in a few years ago, we were working at a very high level, right? But when we think about those call centers, we've got to get down to the very minute detail.
Yeah, so when I think about that a little bit more, it's sometimes the level of detail is driven by what role somebody is performing. So just to kind of build off of what Angelique's saying there, we've got call centers that they have dual monitors. They have up to 4 or 5 different systems they're using, whether it's a kind of a web, like a GUI interface, or a web system, or something that's running off of their machine, right? And they're toggling back and forth to answer members' questions. And in some instances, they have to find the information or the answer to that member's question in a very sequential and detailed order, right? But that's a little bit different than, say, one of our nurses that's calling and talking to somebody about how they're managing their condition, whether it's let's just say a diabetes, for example. And in order for that nurse to really connect with that member, they're not going to ask a list of questions in a very sequential order that sounds like a test to the member. So there's a different type of skill there, right, where they still have to get some information. They need to know how to navigate the systems. They need to log specific information, but they also need to perform it in a way that doesn't feel prescriptive, which is a little bit different than a member calling in with a question. They really just need the answer, and they need it very quickly. So the task analysis might be at a different level for those, just those two scenarios, and then sales folks developing training for them is a little bit different for them to be able to perform on the job, to present it to brokers or employers about their choices. They're a little, we wouldn't necessarily have as much the detail, like down to the, you're going to go to this, you're going to, they need to know more about where their resources are, and not necessarily in a sequential order.
Yep, that's exactly right. And if you want to come off of mute, please make sure you raise your hand at any time. Who conducts task analysis in your group? Seniorities, analysts. Well, variety of folks. We have an initial analysis done by a person in a position called a learning consultant, or even an instructional design manager who will receive a work request. And then once they pass the information on to the instructional design team or the development team who is going to be tasked with doing the work, and there's another more granular layer of analysis completed by instructional designers, documentation analysts, e-learning developers, whoever's going to be putting that solution together. Junior IDs are not typically going to do the analysis, although they contribute, but typically it's going to be a senior ID or a lead who's going to do that analysis.
Yeah, unless it's something that in their wheelhouse, right? Like
right.
Potentially they an instructional design one might have experience in an area, or maybe it's not as big of a solution, or maybe it's lower risk. So we could, give a more junior ID that opportunity, right? Because one of the things that we're always constantly looking at is, what's our talent look like internally? Are we developing people who are the new seniors, right, in 2 to 3 years? And how can we get folks there to make sure that we've got a pipeline full of resources that are talented, but also, have had the experience along the way to put them in a place where they could thrive and step up.
That's exactly right. What other questions? We've got a few minutes left. Do other groups use your task analysis? I'm hearing some interference in the background, but yeah.
That's a good question. To be candid, this is such a huge organization that sometimes, more often than not, the the business areas that we're working with have not actually developed um, protocols or processes that for specific areas. And in that instance, we have had places, different groups that will use our task analysis to actually help document. Now, we're not going to document the processes for them, but the work sometimes goes hand in hand. Sometimes we're asked to develop performance solutions for systems that haven't even been built, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in that instance, we're kind of coming in on the front end and doing some of that work because that's what our learners need to do their jobs. So in that instance, they might, some of our business partners might leverage the work that we do.
Other questions? Comments? Sure. The processes are constantly being refined. I'm reading the question, trying to make sure I understand. For example, might a task analysis? Oh, all the time. We find that when we are looking at the tasks that need to be trained, we develop solutions that are best suited to train that task. So sometimes it is that goes hand in hand with knowing the learning audience, right? That target learner. If that target learner is an experienced associate who's an expert, and we're just talking about changing some very small details of the system that the person is an expert at working in, we don't need to pull 500 people into training across the country to impact that change. I think it is just sort of developing a job aid, and we might say, oh, we can get a document analyst to get that QRG or quick reference guide together that describes this, or maybe it's even an announcement, and send that information out via the normal communication channels that team works within. And those experts really can train themselves with that information to utilize the new features or functionality that's been implemented in the system. So yeah, there are so many factors that go into the solution that comes out of a task analysis. No doubt about it.
And at this point, we've run out of time for the webinar, and I'd like to thank Angelique and Bridget for being so gracious with their time and their expertise and sharing with us today. I'm hoping we can thank them as we exit out of the meeting. This concludes our formal webinar for today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.